Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the But First She Failed podcast. If you've been listening in or watching us on YouTube, because we're now live on YouTube, I'd love for you to join us there if you like watching videos for your podcast. We're really trying to grow our community there. But if you've been listening or watching, you know that we've been doing a little mini series on perfectionism. The other day, a friend actually mentioned to me, actually, a few of you guys have mentioned to me that this has been really helpful, but a friend mentioned to me how he's been listening and how it actually made him realize that he's been dealing with perfectionism as well. And then he started sharing with me what he believed were the root causes of what led to his perfectionism, right? And I was like, wow, that is so fascinating. I thought it was such a fascinating topic for him to kind of go back and kind of just know, kind of like, this is what led to this. And I thought, I was just inspired, right? I was inspired to do an episode about this topic, about what are the causes, what are the root causes of perfectionism, right? What happened in our childhood, or what are the things that could have led us here, right? I thought it was such a fascinating topic and helpful to explore, because if you're anything like me, you've recently realized, or maybe you realized it a while ago, that perfectionism can actually affect our careers, our businesses, our personal lives, and so much more. It causes a lot of anxiety around a lot of issues and can take away a lot of joy in our lives. So it's really important that we overcome this. And a way to overcome this, or a journey, it's a process, right? And one of the steps that I think is really helpful for me whenever I'm healing from anything or overcoming anything is really knowing what caused it and what led me to get here, right? And so if you're anything like me, knowing what caused it in your life will be helpful to you on your healing journey as well. So I thought it would be helpful to explore the causes of perfectionism and, break it down and know kind of what led to this, right? As well as some different ways to combat it, right? So in this episode, we're going to chat about perfectionism, where it comes from, whether it's a genetic thing, an environmental thing, the root causes, as well as ways to combat it. So without further ado, here's the episode. So the first thing we should look into is it a genetic thing or is it an environmental thing, right? I love to, whenever I'm interested in a topic, I love to kind of peel back the onion and kind of go through the layers and really get to know a lot about it, right? So what I found through researching this was that perfectionism is actually a complex trait influenced by both genetics and environmental factors, meaning individuals are neither entirely made or born as perfectionists, but rather a combination of both, right? So, you may know that in your family it runs, and you may be wondering, like, is this something that I was just like raised into, or is this something that's in my genetic DNA? So apparently there's some people that are more predisposed, or yes, they're more inclined, sorry for lack of a better word, they're more inclined towards being a perfectionist, right? That's just in their genetic makeup, right? But, there's also a very big importance when it comes to environmental factors, right? Early childhood experiences are huge when it comes to perfectionism, right? So, childhood experiences, parenting style, societal pressure significantly shape people and their development into perfectionists, right? So, how does this look like? A way that environmental factors really affect us could be through our parents, right? And their parenting style, the way that they parented us. Right? So, high parental expectations, controlling parenting styles, critical environments can contribute to perfectionist tendencies, right? So, maybe if your parents, I grew up with a lot of people like this, where maybe their parents were like, you need to get an A+, because if you don't get an A+, if you get a B+, that's not acceptable, right? You need to get an A. Like, we will not accept anything less than an A, right? So if your parents had really, really high, like, they put a lot of pressure on you, they made everything competitive. Maybe you played sports and they were just like constantly pushing you for excellence, maybe because maybe they wanted you to go pro. They really just had high level of like a high bar for you at all, in all areas, right? They really had the high goals for you. They wanted you to achieve high things, or really, really strive for things that may have developed your perfectionist tendencies, right? Another way that parenting styles could have affected it could be, maybe your parents weren't obsessed with your grades, or they weren't really like setting the bar, I'm sorry, I'm talking fast, the bar super high for you, but rather maybe they were just very authoritative in their way, right? Like their way or the highway. And they really were like, you had to strive, you had to be perfect, your they disciplined you in a way that there was no room for error, right? That you would get punished pretty severely when you would do something wrong. And you basically developed this sense of, you had to be perfect for your parents in order for you to receive your parents' love, right? So if your parents were authoritative in the way that they parented you, that could actually be affecting you in that way, where you now feel like you need to be a perfect person or a perfectionist in all areas in order to be loved, in order to be valued. And so parenting styles in that regard could really affect you. Another way, another environmental factor, which is also kind of coupled with parenting styles, is childhood experiences, right? So maybe your parents were super strict, maybe they were authoritative, and that caused you to be a perfectionist, or maybe they were just really, kind of coupled in that category where they were just like asking you for excellence in all areas in sports. Maybe you did dance maybe you were a musician, maybe you played piano, whatever that was, your grades, whatever area, maybe they were just always asking for excellence. That could be, one area. But another way is maybe your childhood experiences, maybe your parents weren't that present. Maybe you had adverse childhood experiences such as trauma, neglect. There is, what else is there? There's family dysfunction. That can also play a role. So maybe if you grew up in a household where there was a lot of uncertainty. You didn't really know what was coming next. Or maybe you had everything, you thought things were stable, and then all of a sudden major things happened in your childhood, which really disrupted the flow of things. So there was a lot of chaos for a season. Maybe you felt unsafe. Maybe even with your parents, maybe you had to be the parent to your parent, right? Maybe you grew up with an alcoholic parent, or a parent that just kind of was immature emotionally, or, in all areas. Maybe they couldn't get it together for work, or they couldn't get it together for different areas of their lives, or maybe they were depressive and you just felt like you had to be the parent, right? There are a lot of adverse childhood experiences. Maybe you grew up with a single mom and you felt like she never had her life together, and you had to be kind of like a pseudo parent for siblings, or you had to be really hands on. So adverse childhood experiences, they really can create a lot of trauma, right? So a child who experiences trauma or neglect may develop perfectionism as a coping mechanism to feel valuable or in control, right? So how does that translate? So maybe if you grew up with a lot of uncertainty, you didn't really know how things were, you are now striving to be a perfectionist because you want to have predictability in your life. You want to have stability in your life. You want things to be calm, and you feel like you need to be in control of every little conversation, every little thing, every little detail, because you deep down inside have this fear that if you let go of things even a little bit, you could go back to that feeling that you had when you were a child, where there was a lot of trauma, or there was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of uncertainty. You could go back to that, and that can cause a lot of perfectionism, right? Where you want to just be in control of all things because you feel like that's safer. It's a safer place to be, right? So these are some environmental factors that can really affect you, things that happened in your childhood that can really lead to you being a perfectionist now as an adult, right? Other things that could really affect you are your, cultural expectations, right? Some countries and cultures where people are pushed to succeed, like the USA. I was actually listening to a podcast, actually, shout out to Mel Robbins. I love Mel Robbins. Actually, if you are part of the Boss Woman, the But First She Failed Insiders newsletter, then you know that I actually sent out an email yesterday where I was talking about her latest book, The Let Them Theory, and how great it was and how much it impacted me in the month of March. And I talked a lot about that. So I was actually listening to Mel Robbins' podcast yesterday where she had a doctor. His name is Dr. Gabor Mate. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've seen him in a lot of different spaces, and he's just such a profound, such a wise man, older man, has gone through a lot of experiences. But he actually was talking about this, right? There's different countries like the US where we are in a culture where it's like all about expectations, high societal norms, like we need to achieve to win, and how that actually can be a toxic culture, right? He likened it to a laboratory, right? If you are, doing an experiment and you have some specimens and the multiple, you're doing this test and a lot of the samples are dying, then you would call the environment toxic, right? But we don't do that when it comes to why people are so sick. And it can go into so many different areas. But as a society, he was essentially saying that there's a lot of factors that could be deemed toxic, right? And so I love the United States, but there are a lot of things that, can breed a lot of issues, such as that need to achieve, that need to be successful. You feel like a lot of pressures from society, just that you only have value and worth when, if you meet certain expectations, if you achieve certain milestones, if you are successful and different things. So cultural expectations are really a big part of that, right? So what culture did you grow up in as a child? What did you see? Did you see was your family very competitive? Was it very much like a part of the culture within your home to be extremely, competitive and just have really high expectations? And so not only in your home, but in the culture, in the country you grew up with, in the culture that you grew up in, the subculture, all of that, right? Maybe the area, sometimes different social economic areas, right? Maybe you saw a lot more of that if you grew up in an affluent area as opposed to a non area where it's not maybe such a big deal, or maybe they're not talking about it as much. So there's a lot of issues, right? Cultural expectations of what is deemed, what the pressures that are put on you as a child, right? Another thing is educational pressures, right? Early academic pressures can also cause perfectionism, right? So children in environments where high achievement is expected learn to perform at their best at all times and avoid mistakes, right? Gifted and talented children have been shown to experience more stress, perfectionism, and isolation than their peers. While academic success is important and a source of pride for children and parents, perfectionism can come across the line and actually become something really unhealthy, right? So this is something that I've seen a lot of times, right, as well, right? Especially growing up, I remember there were a lot of kids that were in very competitive spaces. I kind of mentioned it, where their parents were like, "You cannot get any." Especially this is especially true because I grew up in a very diverse, part of Chicago. I had a lot of friends from a lot of different backgrounds, and I remember this being especially true with some of my Asian friends, a little bit more, or South Asian friends as well, where their parents just wouldn't accept anything but like excellence when it comes to academics, when it comes to career paths, when it comes to, what were deemed good career paths. Let me take that back. So what were deemed good career paths, such as being a doctor or being a lawyer, different things like that. But this can start off in school, right? So if they are put into programs where they're, the top of the class, they're kind of in separate classes from the majority of the school, majority of their peer group or their grade level, and they're put into these highly competitive and highly gifted programs, then a lot of times that can breed perfectionism as well. So maybe if you were a child and you were deemed very smart, very gifted, whatever the term is, and you were put into these programs that were just, you excelled and you were in double honors programs or honors programs and or AP, and maybe a lot of your friends, that was just a norm, which is it's a good thing to be competitive. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because I do think it's a good thing, but a lot of these times, these educational pressures that happen to us when we're really little or when we're growing up, they can really form our identities, right? That we have to perform at a certain level in order to be loved, in order to be perfect, right? So educational pressures can be another developmental thing that happens to us when we are a child that can really show up as an adult as perfectionism, right? So another way that it could kind of come up as an adult now is maybe you work in a workplace that is very competitive. It's likely that it would bring this up, right? So I've shared my story in the past before. I used to work in national news, and I worked for this one news startup, which was, two major companies, a Spanish major network and an English major network. They came together, and this was about 10 years ago now. And it was, there was a talk of the industry. There was a lot of big hires. There was a lot of money put into this project. It was a lot. It was in a great way, right? It was a really exciting project to be a part of. Well, with that, there were a lot of kids that were Ivy League kids, right? Most of my colleagues were Ivy League. I was not an Ivy League scholar, or I was not a graduate from an Ivy League university. And so this actually got me into really kind of a cycle of comparison, where I was like, comparing myself to a lot of these kids that did go to Ivy League schools, and, they did have wealthy parents and grew up in affluent areas and all the things, right? So comparison is another subset of kind of this world. But where I was going with this was workplace, right? So if you work in a very competitive workplace, which that place ended up being very competitive, it wasn't very collaborative, which is, I think, my personal opinion, is one of the reasons it probably didn't do well and it's no longer in existence, because it was a lot of competitiveness. It was a lot of, very competitiveness, the best in the industry, or people that were deemed the best in the industry. Maybe they weren't, but they had the best connections. And so all this to say that if you work in a workplace that is very competitive, maybe you went to school and you went to very competitive schools, you had a lot of pressure in whatever schools you went to growing up, and now you work in very, for a big company that's very competitive. These perfectionist qualities could be popping up because of all the competition, because of the workplace, right? So it could be kind of an unhealthy place to work as well, and it could kind of bring these things up now. And so another area, a way that, another cause rather of perfectionism is social media and comparison. So this is kind of where I was going with the other one, right? So social media and comparison, I think my generation, which I am a millennial, I don't think we grew up with it so bad as much as Gen Zs and younger generations now, where they are growing up with social media. Social media and comparison is still an issue, right? If you are constantly exposed to others' curated lives on social media, that impacts your self-esteem. It does. So, right, it can drive to perfectionism. Influencers, celebrities, successful online creators are known for creating images that fuel perfectionism in people who compare themselves to them, right? which is social media in a nutshell for the most part, right? A lot of the people that we follow, a lot of the celebrities, a lot of these influencers, you're just kind of looking at their lives and you're inspired, but at some point it becomes not so much inspiration. At some point it becomes kind of comparison and why don't you have those things? And it's a very slippery slope. Some people are great at not comparing themselves. Some people are not. I've struggled with that in the past, and it's something that I have to be monitoring myself, right? I can't be consuming too much social media because it could quickly fall. If I consume too much social media, especially that kind of content, I could quickly get to a place where I am not grateful for the things that I have. And I start comparing myself to people that have millions and maybe millions of followers, maybe millions of dollars in banks, etc. And it can be unhealthy because then now I'm not looking at my goals, I'm looking at their goals or what's going on in their life, right? And that is not a healthy place to be. So if you struggle with that as well, social media and comparison, that is something that you need to monitor so that you don't go down that slippery slope, right? So perfectionism in people who compare themselves to them, it is important to remember that a person's social media feed doesn't represent the reality of their life. Guys, this is so important. Only the part that they want other people to see. So remember that every single influencer, they're curating this. It's curated. Even if it doesn't look curated, it's still curated. Let me tell you, like, maybe their house looks messy, but it's probably not as messy as it was before, right? So nothing is 100% real. People do curate, for depending on whatever story they're trying to tell. And so just remember that social media and comparison they breed perfectionism, right? So if you are a mom and you are always looking at these Pinterest or I was actually having a conversation with a friend at a party this past Sunday. We were talking about this. We are both moms that have projects on the side that we love. She has a full-time business that is, up and running, and she's had it before she had her child. But we were just talking about the pressure, the societal pressure and the pressure that we put on ourselves to be the perfect moms, where we're going towards our ambitions, our goals, and we're ambitious and we're going towards our projects. But there's also a pressure for us to be, so on social media, right? As far as like comparing ourselves, when we see this on social media, rather, where we see other moms taking their multiple kids, homeschooling them, taking them to the park all day, making sandwiches, making food from scratch, doing recipes, doing all the things. And it can be challenging. It can be something where you start comparing yourself and not feeling like as good of a mother in other areas. And the truth is, everyone has different dreams, everyone has different giftings. There are amazing women, incredible women that are stay-at-home moms, and that's all they want to do. And God bless them. That's amazing. That's beautiful work. That's an amazing thing, right? I love journalism and I love storytelling and I love content creation and I love interviewing and all these things, essentially podcasting, right? And creating content. I just love learning and sharing the information that I learn. And so this is why it's just different, right? So I don't think I could be a full stay-at-home mom forever because that's just not my gifting, right? Some other people are really gifted in that area and that's their dream, right? And so anyways, and I'm sure they can probably struggle with comparison as well. I'm not in their shoes, but they may be comparing themselves to people that have businesses or people that have different projects. And right, so social media and comparison is just a very tricky and slippery slope, and it can lead to a lot of perfectionism. So be careful with that one. Another thing that leads to perfectionism is personality type, right? Certain personality types are more prone to perfectionism. People who are motivated by success, achievement, or recognition, crave the validation of others, or are type A people, are driven to succeed and are more likely to experience perfectionism. These personalities lend themselves to self-criticism. While these traits can have benefits, they can cause perfectionism and can lead to an unhealthy place. So I would say that I'm not technically a type A. If you know me, I'm very kind of big picture. One of my friends used to say, you're very big picture. I'm not very detail oriented. I could be better. Some people are way better at this stuff. I'm not really a type A person, but I have dealt with perfectionism, as you guys know, listening to me on this, as I go through the series and this process, as we go through it all together. And so it's interesting that being a perfectionist has led me to have some type A qualities where I want to control all the little things, all the little details, because it causes a lot of anxiety in me for things not to be perfect or not to be what I imagined and all that. So I thought that was really interesting. Another thing that can cause, of course, it can cause perfectionism is obviously mental health conditions, right? So perfectionism is not a mental health disorder. It's a personality trait. So I wanted to make sure that I said that, right? This is, just kind of research and that I found. Again, I'm not an expert on this topic. I'm just someone that's living and walking through it and sharing what I am walking through because I think it could be helpful. And, but there are some mental health conditions that are highly linked to perfectionism, right? So research has found that people with obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD are more likely to be perfectionists, although it's important to note that OCD is not the same thing as perfectionism. So if you are a perfectionist and you say, I'm OCD, you most likely are not OCD, you're just a perfectionist. They're very different things. And it is important to note that people that have OCD tend to have perfectionism, but you can totally have perfectionism and not have OCD. So people with depression or anxiety could have lower self-esteem, which could lead them to perfectionism. So this is something that I've also said that I've struggled with in the past too, with depression, anxiety, all these different things. And it comes from like, having lower self-esteem and different things that happen to you in your childhood can cause this, right? And so this could also lead to perfectionism, right? There's a well-known link between perfectionism and eating disorders as well. So this is definitely, if you are in this space of you kind of are seeing yourself in this is definitely something where I would recommend seeing a therapist, getting into therapy if you're not, or if you are in therapy, having a conversation with your therapist about this topic, right? Because I think this is really important. They can truly help you get to the bottom of this because, I can give you tips and tricks, and which I am going to give you some ways to combat in a minute, but it's truly important that you do the deep work couple of with a therapist of getting the healing and, getting to the source of what's causing this, what childhood traumas or what things happen. Maybe you don't even know the traumas happened, but they did, or certain things actually are traumatic for you that maybe you wouldn't consider them big traumatic events, right? And so it's really important to get with a therapist if this is something that you are really struggling with and you really, really feel that you need help with. And it's not something that you feel like it's something that if it's crippling or affecting your everyday life, definitely, or really stopping you from going after things, it's really important that you get into therapy, get with a good licensed professional to help with this. So now ways to combat it, right? These are different tips and tricks for someone that is struggling with perfectionism, but maybe it's not a severe perfectionism, or maybe, you feel that maybe therapy isn't the route for you as far as like, it's not as severe, it's not really crippling your life in a huge way. Then maybe these are some ways to combat it, right? Document what triggers are, right? Get a notebook and start adding the date, event, and what triggered you. And I got this from, I just want to make sure that I say it correctly. I got this from choosingtherapy.com. I thought that was so important. These are their tips. I haven't done these myself, but I do plan on doing this soon. So they, say to identify your triggers, keep a log and track when your perfectionist tendencies come up, noting when and where you feel the most pressure to be perfect. It can be helpful to take a note of things like what was happening at work or school, who were you spending a lot of time with, what media or social media have you been consuming. It can, help if you identify patterns, track your progress, and develop healthy coping skills. Here's how to keep a log that can help you identify your triggers, right? So remember to get a notebook and start documenting these things, right? You can start a notebook or use, the notes app. That's what I usually do on my phone, designated for tracking perfectionism triggers, right? So make 4 columns across: date, time, perfectionist behaviors, possible triggers. Notice your specific perfectionism traits, like doing something over and over again. Do you record it 20 times? Do you reread or rewrite that email 100 times before you send it? Are you overworking? Are you just working because you feel like if you stop, something's bad's going to happen? Overworking. Are you having intrusive self-critical thoughts? Are you really down, really beating yourself up because maybe the outcome didn't come out the way you wanted, and now you're spiraling and really having these deep like you're just condemning yourself and just feeling like you're not good enough, you shouldn't even be doing this, and really just beating yourself up internally with the voice in your head, what you're saying to yourself? Then definitely document it, right? Every time you notice these traits, fill out a log, note any potential triggers, including people, places, deadlines, expectations, etc. This is really good. Track every day for at least 2 weeks and notice patterns that start to emerge. So this was really good. I wasn't really thinking about doing it every single day, but track it every day for at least 2 weeks to start seeing if you start seeing a pattern, right? For example, I know that I'm very much aware that I put a lot of pressure on myself when it comes to my children's birthday parties, and my son is going to have his birthday at the end of the month. So I don't know what we're going to do and how we're going to celebrate it just yet, but I know that I need to start already preparing myself to not be a perfectionist for his birthday, to really be in the moment, really enjoy it, make it a special moment, but not be overwhelmed and beating myself up and being a perfectionist about it. So maybe this is something that you also deal with and you also understand. So maybe if there's things that you already know are coming up and you in the past have already noted that in yourself, write those things down as well. Here are some questions to get a better sense of what is causing the perfectionism, right? What's going on right now at work or at school? Am I facing any deadlines? Are there any performance reviews, tests, or evaluations coming up? Who have I been spending time with? Sometimes you have certain friends that bring this out in you, or maybe you have certain family members that bring this out in you. Who are you spending your time with, right? Have you been spending more time on social media than usual? Like we mentioned earlier, sometimes you're maybe comparing your life subconsciously without even knowing it to other people. What places have you visited lately? What is a negative self-talk? So that one I think is really key and really important. Like, what are you saying to yourself? What are the things? Because that could be evidence to something bigger. What does the negative self-talk sound like? What are you saying to yourself, right? And so another way to combat it is ask for feedback from someone you trust. Seeking feedback from friends and family colleagues can help you, gain external perspective. Maybe you have a friend that is like, every time you go to the school function, you act a certain way, right? Or maybe you get stressed out, with whenever your boss comes into town, or whenever you have your monthly review. I'm just saying random ideas, but there could be people in your life, like maybe a colleague could say, hey, every time that you have a meeting with that department, I notice you get very anxious and, whatever, and so, or maybe if you're a business owner, you have other business friends that can kind of point you in the right direction as well. So remember to ask for feedback from someone you trust. Like, start noticing internally and start asking someone that you trust, like if they notice any of these perfectionist qualities coming up in you at different moments, or if there's any triggers, anything specific things that bring up these things, right? Another thing is you can go for a professional evaluation. That's what I mentioned earlier. I think this is really important, especially if you know that you have some stuff that you haven't dealt with and you really need to deal with it and you want to move forward. It's essential, right, to not do this stuff by yourself, to get a good therapist that you trust and really that can really get you out of that negative headspace and into a good headspace, right? Practice mindfulness and acceptance strategies. This is really good for someone that has a lot of anxiety. If you're really critical of yourself, there's different things like different apps that you can use to be mindfulness, to maybe pause. For me, faith is a big thing. And so I make sure for me, I make sure to spend some time in the word, spend some time reading the Bible, seeing what God says, what's the word God has for me that day, and really thinking on it and meditating on God's word, because it always brings me peace. Every single time, it always brings me peace, putting on some worship music and just realizing that it's not about me, that I don't have to take the burden of all the things, that I don't have to be perfect. I'm already loved. I'm already chosen. God has the very fact that I'm alive, and also you too, the very fact that you are alive means that there's a purpose on your life, there's a calling on your life, but also that you are already loved, you're already accepted. Like, you don't have to do anything else, right? So acceptance strategies, right? What are the acceptance strategies that you could do for yourself? How can you be more compassionate, right? Another one is focus on self-compassion, right? Practicing self-compassion can be a helpful way to reduce impact of perfectionism and negative thoughts. What's different things that make you feel better, right? Is it working out? Is it being creative? And treat yourself to some kindness and some compassion, right? Treat yourself like a good friend, right? Oftentimes we're so much nicer to our friends or to our family members than we are to ourselves. It's okay to be human. Remind yourself that, you have value, your worth, you're not related to whether you do good or perfectly. Like, no matter what happens, it's not the end of the world. Things will be okay. Like, no matter how big this project is or this goal that you are working towards or whatever the situation is, it's going to be okay. So if you kind of focus on that self-compassion, those are some ways to help you. But there you have it. Those are the root causes of perfectionism and some ways to combat it. I hope it was helpful. Remember, if you are watching on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button. We are looking to grow there, and we're just so grateful to have you. Thanks so much for joining us, and hope you have an incredible week, and hope to see you next time.